I remember the day I found Maplewood Hills online, rows of picturesque houses, each framed by pristine lawns and tree-lined sidewalks. It looked like something out of a suburban dream, a place of peace, stability, and a sense of community. I had been searching for a new home after the apartment we rented was sold, and Maplewood Hills seemed perfect for raising my son, Mikey. Mikey was 8 years old then, a gentle child on the autism spectrum. He flourished in structured environments and routine. Our old apartment had been cramped and noisy, neighbors stomping overhead, loud arguments through thin walls. Mikey struggled to settle, often covering his ears and rocking when the chaos was too much. So, I was determined to find a quiet neighborhood where he could thrive. When I finally stepped out of my car at Maplewood Hills, the serenity took my breath away. The hum of lawnmowers in the distance, the mild smell of blooming roses, the faint chirp of birds. Even the cars moved slowly along the immaculate roads as though no one was in a rush. I felt a wave of relief, convinced I'd discovered the perfect place. The HOA, Homeowners Association, was well known for enforcing high standards. The property listing boasted uniform mailboxes, meticulously maintained landscaping, and a communal park at the center of the subdivision. The real estate agent, Ms. Collins, assured me that the HOA fees were reasonable and absolutely worth the manicured setting. She did mention an active board president, but gave little detail beyond that. Unbeknownst to me, that board president would soon become the single greatest obstacle to the peace I craved. Her name was Karen Wilcox, though some neighbors quietly referred to her as HOA Karen, not to her face, of course. Because, as I would learn, crossing Karen meant incurring her wrath. At first glance, Maplewood Hills was everything I hoped for Mikey. We moved in during late spring, as the community park exploded with vibrant tulips and bright green grass. My boy's eyes shone with curiosity when he first saw the wide sidewalk outside our door. He walked along it, counting each step, gently flapping his hands in a familiar, soothing motion. I set up his new bedroom with a comfortingly repetitive design, calming teal walls, a poster of the solar system. Mikey adored space, and a large rug with shapes for him to trace. Beneath the gentle hum of the air conditioner, I prayed that this would be the fresh start we needed. We soon discovered that Maplewood Hills had an online forum, an official site run by the HOA. I dutifully registered, per the instructions left in our mailbox. The forum was full of announcements about upcoming events, neighborhood guidelines, and cheerful posts about block parties. I noticed one user, Karen W., board president, posted frequently, reminding people of yard maintenance deadlines or parking restrictions. It all seemed innocuous enough. Before long, I learned that Maplewood Hills was the kind of place where everything had a rule. From where your trash bins could sit on non-collection days, to the type of decorations allowed on front doors, to how high your hedges could grow. However, I figured as long as we followed the rules, everything would be fine. I had no idea how quickly that assumption would be tested. For the first week, no one bothered us, life was tranquil, and I focused on helping Mikey adjust. If a neighbor waved hello, we'd wave back. Mikey started exploring the short walk to the community park. He loved to count the daisies in the flower beds. In the evenings, I'd read him stories about astronauts exploring distant planets. The tension started building, however, the day a small note appeared on our door. Please ensure your lawn meets the community standard length. Grass should not exceed 3 inches. Karen Wilcox, HOA President. It was the first sign that Maplewood Hills' promise of tranquility might come with a cost, living under the watchful eye of an HOA Karen who believed she ruled this suburban kingdom. The next morning, as I finished mowing the lawn, I saw a figure briskly walking down the sidewalk with the confidence of a monarch inspecting her domain. It was a woman in her early 50s, hair dyed a meticulous honey blonde, wearing a pastel blue polo embroidered with Maplewood Hills HOA. She carried a clipboard and exuded an air of authority. She marched up to my driveway without hesitation. "Hello," she called out, her tone artificially bright. "You must be the new resident in unit number 227. I'm Karen Wilcox, president of our HOA." She extended a hand in greeting. Even as I shook it, I felt her gaze scanning my yard, my house, everything. "It's nice to meet you," I replied cautiously. "I'm Lisa. My son Mikey and I just moved in last week." Karen gave a clipped nod. "Yes, I saw that." She made a note on her clipboard, then frowned slightly. "I left you a friendly reminder about lawn height. We have a standard here, under 3 inches. We work hard to maintain property values. I trust you won't let it become an eyesore." I swallowed a wave of irritation. We'd only been here a few days, and the lawn was barely longer than 3 inches. "I actually just mowed," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. She glanced over the grass. "Excellent. Thank you for taking prompt action. We want Maplewood Hills to remain pristine." Then, as if reading from a script, she added, "We also strongly encourage residents to attend monthly board meetings. We discuss the latest guidelines and any issues that arise. Next one is in 2 weeks, 7 p.m. at the community center." Her eyes flicked to my front door. "I do hope to see you there." I gave a polite nod. "Sure, I'll see if I can make it." She lingered for a moment, scanning the perimeter of my house with a calculating look, perhaps searching for violations. Then, with a curt smile, she said, "Have a nice day," and strode away. I exhaled, feeling like I'd just passed an unexpected test. Moments later, Mikey came outside. He was humming softly, counting the stripes on his t-shirt. I guided him to the side yard, where he could run around and explore. A flicker of concern crossed my mind. If Karen was so strict about lawn lengths, how would she react to a child who sometimes flapped his hands, hummed to calm himself, or repeated phrases out loud? I pushed the thought aside. We had every right to live here peacefully. Maplewood Hills might have rules, but it was also part of the real world, where children with special needs existed. No HOA regulation could change that. Mikey had been receiving ABA therapy, applied behavior analysis, for 2 years. The sessions had helped him with communication skills, self-regulation, and daily living tasks. Our old arrangement involved a therapist visiting the apartment twice a week, guiding Mikey through structured activities and play-based learning. After moving to Maplewood Hills, we transferred his therapy to a local agency, Bright Path Behavioral Services. They assigned a new therapist, Daniel, a warm and patient young man who specialized in early intervention for children on the spectrum. Daniel visited us twice a week for 2-hour sessions, focusing on improving Mikey's communication, social skills, and daily routines. From the outside looking in, ABA therapy can appear repetitive, short tasks repeated multiple times, prompting and reinforcement, structured break times. The child might engage in repeated motions or short drills. For Mikey, these were essential steps that helped him learn new skills. He thrived on routine, consistency, and a calm environment free from distractions. When I first told Daniel about the neighborhood's strict HOA, he shrugged and said, "No worries. I've worked in plenty of communities. We're just there to help your son. Everything is above board with the necessary credentials. They can't interfere." His words gave me confidence. Indeed, legally, nobody could bar a licensed therapist from providing medically recognized care to a child. However, I knew enough about HOAs, especially those with a Karen at the helm, to worry that they might try to intervene if they perceived the therapy as some sort of unauthorized business. Mikey didn't do well with changes in schedule, so I made sure he knew exactly when Daniel would arrive. I kept a visual calendar on the fridge, marking therapy days with a big, friendly star. On those days, Mikey would sit by the window, occasionally flapping or humming, waiting for Daniel's car to pull into the driveway. Daniel's first session at our new house went smoothly. He sat with Mikey at the dining room table, going through labeling exercises with picture cards. "This is a cat. What sound does a cat make?" Then, they played a matching game on a small rug, followed by a short break where Mikey got to bounce a foam ball. All standard therapy procedures, quiet, calm, nothing disruptive to neighbors. But I did notice, through the living room window, the figure of Karen strolling by. She paused in front of our house, eyes narrowing as she spotted Daniel's parked car. She seemed to be taking mental notes. I wondered if she was going to rummage for some arcane bylaw about frequent visitors. I forced myself to ignore her. We had every right to host a licensed therapist for our child's care. Little did I know how soon she'd escalate that scrutiny. A few days later, an envelope appeared in our mailbox with the HOA logo. Inside was a letter from Karen, typed and signed in her ornate script. Dear Ms., my last name. We have observed repetitive, structured activities and multiple visits by a non-resident who appears to be conducting business on your property. Please note that our association requires board approval for any in-home business or service operating within the neighborhood. We politely request an explanation of these visits and the nature of this business. If the activity does not comply with our HOA bylaws, further action may be taken. Sincerely, Karen Wilcox, HOA President. As I read it, my blood began to simmer. How dare she label my son's therapy as an in-home business? This was clearly medical service, vital to Mikey's development. If I needed any proof that Karen was invasive, here it was in black and white. She had no right to pry into medical or therapeutic matters. I responded with a succinct email. Subject: Notice about home visits. Dear Ms. Wilcox, the individual visiting our home is a licensed ABA therapist providing services for my child, who is on the autism spectrum. These are medically recognized sessions, fully authorized by state and federal guidelines. This is not a business. Kindly refrain from categorizing essential therapy as commercial activity. We are in complete compliance with the law, and no HOA bylaw supersedes the right to necessary healthcare services. Thank you for your understanding. Lisa, last name. I hit send, my heart pounding from anger. I expected either a grudging acknowledgement or a total silence. Instead, I received a response that same evening. Subject: Notice about home visits. Lisa, while we sympathize with any medical situation, the frequency and nature of these visits appear structured and ongoing. Our bylaws prohibit recurrent commercial or instructive activities without prior board approval. I suggest you submit a formal request to the HOA if you wish to continue. Otherwise, we may need to intervene to uphold community standards. Regards, Karen Wilcox, HOA President. My jaw dropped. The audacity, demanding that I apply for board approval for my child's therapy. Not only was that insulting, it could also be illegal, since medical services are protected by federal and state laws. The thinly veiled threat was also infuriating. We may need to intervene. I mulled over my options. Some part of me wanted to storm into Karen's house and confront her face to face. Another part of me realized I should proceed carefully, because HAs can be tenacious. I decided to keep a record of all communications, just in case I needed legal backup down the road. Thus began an uneasy standoff. I was determined not to yield to her demands, and she seemed equally determined to push the matter. Meanwhile, Mikey remained blissfully unaware of the drama, focusing on learning new words with Daniel and counting every crack in the sidewalk. Despite the escalating conflict, Mikey's sessions with Daniel were going well. We saw steady progress. He began using short phrases more consistently. Instead of always pointing or gesturing, he'd say, "I want juice," or "bathroom, please." Small victories, but each one made my heart swell with hope. We established a consistent routine. Daniel arrived on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3 p.m. They'd work on communication tasks, take a short snack break, then do motor skills exercises using simple shapes and puzzles. Mikey adored the structure and responded well to Daniel's calm demeanor. However, every so often, I'd glance through the living room window and catch sight of Karen's silhouette. She'd be strolling by, phone in hand, or standing at a distance with that suspicious look. One afternoon, Daniel laughed politely, trying to make light of it. "She's not even being subtle, is she?" I smiled wearily. "No, she's not. But so long as we're doing nothing wrong, we shouldn't let it scare us." He agreed, yet we both knew how persistent HOAs could be. In some communities, board presidents effectively acted like local tyrants, threatening fines, imposing petty sanctions, and stirring up trouble for perceived violations. Over the next few weeks, notes from Karen started arriving more frequently. She never used the word autism or disability, but she alluded to disturbing repetitive activities and unapproved therapy. I ignored the notes, keeping them in a folder. Each time I saw a new envelope in my mailbox, my chest tightened, anticipating the next wave of condescension. Meanwhile, the neighbors seemed pleasant enough. Some waved hello, others introduced themselves. A few families had children who played in the community park. I noticed none of them engaged in therapy sessions that might draw Karen's ire. One neighbor, Mr. Lopez, muttered quietly that Karen had hounded him about his granddaughter's pottery lessons at home, though eventually the issue faded. Another neighbor simply rolled his eyes whenever Karen's name came up, saying, "Just keep your head down, she'll move on eventually." But I suspected that, in our case, Karen wouldn't simply move on. Because we had something that intrigued her sense of control, repeated visits by a professional. The more I tried to ignore her, the more determined she seemed to get. One Thursday afternoon, as Daniel guided Mikey through a short puzzle game, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Karen herself, arms folded. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Lisa," she said curtly, "I need to observe what's happening. I have reason to believe this is an unauthorized instructional session. For insurance and liability reasons, the HOA must confirm compliance." My jaw dropped. "What? You have no right to barge in here or observe my son's therapy. This is private, medically based care." Karen's eyes flared. "We have every right to ensure no bylaw is violated." The repeated visits and structured activities certainly look like business operations. We had a similar case once where someone was running daycare sessions without approval. Behind me, Daniel stood, his expression a mixture of shock and composure. Mikey, sensing tension, began humming softly, hugging one of his plush toys. I stepped outside, shutting the door gently so Mikey wouldn't hear more. "Karen," I said, trying not to scream, "my child has a diagnosed condition. This is legitimate therapy with a licensed professional. You are overstepping." She pressed her lips into a thin line. "Then prove it. Show me the documentation." The audacity stole my breath. "My son's medical records are private," I snapped. "I'm not obligated to show them to you. If you want to keep pushing this, I'll contact an attorney." She narrowed her eyes. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise that I will defend my child's rights," I replied, voice trembling with anger. Karen huffed, glancing around as if looking for neighbors who might support her. Then, with a scowl, she turned on her heel and walked away, muttering something about fines and enforcement. I leaned against the door, trying to steady my heartbeat. When I returned inside, Daniel offered a sympathetic look. "That was intense." "It's beyond intense," I whispered, tears threatening. "She wants to turn my son's therapy into some sort of code violation. I'm so tired of this." I glanced at Mikey, who was rocking slightly in the corner, likely picking up on my distress. Daniel gently nodded. "Let's continue with the session. Then, if you need statements from me for an attorney or the board, I'm here to help." I managed a smile of gratitude. We resumed Mikey's therapy as best we could, but my mind was heavy with the confrontation. The line had been crossed. If Karen believed she could intrude so brazenly, what would she do next? Sure enough, that weekend, I found a final warning letter taped to my front door, no longer just a note in the mailbox. Karen's tone was even more threatening. Final warning, unapproved educational/instructional sessions. Dear Ms. Last name. Despite previous notices, unauthorized sessions appear to continue at your home. This violates Section 8.4 of the Maplewood Hills Bylaws, which prohibits ongoing classes, lessons, or business activities without board consent. If you fail to comply, the HOA reserves the right to impose daily fines and pursue further action, which may include liens or legal measures. Sincerely, Karen Wilcox, HOA President. My fingers tightened around the paper. I was furious, but also anxious. HOAs can wield real power, fining residents for alleged violations, placing liens on houses if fines go unpaid, and dragging them into lengthy disputes. Even if we were fully in the right legally, I knew the stress and cost of defending ourselves could be burdensome. I decided enough was enough. I printed out copies of Mikey's official therapy documents, though I redacted personal medical details. I also compiled relevant laws confirming that licensed ABA therapy for a child is protected. Then I emailed the entire HOA board, not just Karen, requesting an opportunity to speak at the next monthly meeting. If I had to, I would show them the law, face to face, so they'd realize how out of bounds Karen was. A day later, I received a polite note from the board's secretary, Ms. Guerra, confirming that I could address the board at the upcoming meeting. It was scheduled for Tuesday evening at the community center. She added, "We hope to clarify any misunderstandings amicably." That gave me a glimmer of hope that not everyone on the board was Karen's puppet. The days leading up to that meeting felt tense. Mikey picked up on my stress, occasionally covering his ears or refusing to engage in certain activities. I tried my best to keep calm, not wanting him to sense the turmoil. Still, each new therapy session felt like it happened under a spotlight. Any moment, I expected Karen to pop up with a camera or demand an inspection. Tuesday arrived, and I dressed in comfortable but professional attire. I left Mikey at home with a trusted babysitter, explaining that Mommy had an important grown-up meeting. With a folder of documents in hand, I walked to the community center, determined to set the record straight. I arrived early, finding a small crowd milling about inside the community center. Rows of fold-out chairs faced a long table where the 5 board members sat, Karen at the center, flanked by a treasurer, a secretary, a vice president, and one other general member. Karen had her usual clipboard, plus a neat stack of manila folders. As neighbors took their seats, I recognized some faces. A few offered sympathetic nods, presumably aware of the drama. Others seemed indifferent, chatting about landscaping or curb appeal. At exactly 7 p.m., Karen rapped her gavel, calling the meeting to order. They went through mundane business first: budgets, upcoming events, a reminder about the 4th of July block party. My heart pounded, waiting for the agenda item referencing me. Finally, Karen spoke, her voice carrying a faint smugness. "Next, we have a situation involving possible bylaw violations at 227 Maplewood Drive. The resident, Ms. Lisa last name, wishes to address the board regarding recurring sessions that may be unapproved business activities. Ms. last name, please step forward." I clutched my documents, approached the microphone stand, and cleared my throat. "Good evening. I'm Lisa, and I'm here to clarify that the repeated visits at my home are ABA therapy sessions for my child with autism. This is not a business, nor an unapproved lesson. It's a medically necessary service, protected under federal and state laws." I held up a few papers, not revealing personal info, but enough to show official letterheads from Bright Path Behavioral Services. "Here's proof that the therapist is licensed, the sessions are recognized by insurance, and it's purely for my son's developmental needs." I glanced around, noticing nods from some audience members. Karen's expression darkened. She responded briskly, "We appreciate your explanation. However, the bylaws strictly forbid repeated lesson-based activities. We're concerned about traffic, potential noise, and the principle that every resident must follow standard procedures." I took a breath, forcing composure. "With all due respect, Ms. Wilcox, therapy for a child with special needs is not the same as running a business. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act and relevant healthcare regulations, an HOA cannot prohibit or obstruct medically necessary treatment. Period." Silence gripped the room for a moment. The board members exchanged uncertain glances. The treasurer, a kind-looking woman, leaned into her microphone. "If this is indeed a medically licensed therapy, I'm not sure the bylaws apply." Karen fired back, "We can't just take her word for it. We need official proof or some oversight. This neighborhood doesn't allow personal interpretations that circumvent our rules. If we open that door, who knows what else might slip in?" My hands trembled. "You're demanding private medical records for my child? That's beyond the scope of this HOA, and you know it." The vice president, Mr. Tate, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we can find a middle ground. Ms. last name, is it possible to show the board, privately, some certification that your therapist is indeed licensed?" I nodded, yes, of course. I have a letter from Bright Path's clinical director verifying that the sessions are legitimate medical therapy. I'm willing to show that to the board members in confidence, but not in public. My child's personal information must remain protected. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Mr. Tate raised a hand. That seems reasonable. Another board member, Ms. Guerra, added softly, the key point is ensuring no bylaws are broken. If this is truly a recognized medical therapy, I don't see how we can classify it as a commercial enterprise. Karen pursed her lips. Fine. We'll review the documents privately after the meeting. Then we can make a determination. She eyed me with a mixture of contempt and reluctance. But if we find any inconsistencies, we'll have no choice but to enforce sanctions. Exhaling slowly, I nodded. Very well. She moved on to the next agenda item with a swift clang of the gavel. My portion was over, and I stepped away feeling a mix of relief and anger. The unwavering hostility in Karen's tone told me this was far from resolved, but at least some board members seemed open to reason. After the meeting ended, I approached the board table with the folder in hand. Karen remained in her seat, tapping a pen against the clipboard impatiently. Ms. Guerra and Mr. Tate lingered, while the treasurer and the other member drifted away, presumably trusting Karen to handle the details. I quietly slid over the letter from Bright Path's director, Dr. Hayes. It stated, in professional language, that a licensed therapist named Daniel visited the home twice a week to provide ABA services to a child diagnosed with autism, consistent with an existing treatment plan. It also cited relevant laws ensuring the right to these services in a private residence. Mr. Tate read it, nodding. This looks legitimate, he said, glancing at Ms. Guerra, who also nodded. I don't see any violation. This is health-related, not a profit-based operation. Karen, on the other hand, scrutinized the letter, then snapped, we can't even see the child's name or date of birth. For all we know, this could be a generic statement. I kept my voice steady. I redacted personal data to protect my child's privacy. If you need further verification, Daniel or Dr. Hayes can speak to you. But that's as much as I'll disclose to an HOA. You don't have the right to my child's full medical history. Ms. Guerra placed a hand gently on Karen's arm. Karen, I think we've seen enough. This is obviously a legitimate therapy scenario. We're not here to pass judgment on a child's medical needs. Karen's face reddened, but she forced a tight smile. Yes, well, if the rest of the board is satisfied, I suppose we'll... Wait, I cut in. I want assurance in writing that I will not be harassed over this again. I've received multiple threatening letters from you, Ms. Wilcox. My son's therapy will continue legally. I expect no further interference. Mr. Tate nodded. That seems fair. Karen, please draft a short letter affirming that the HOA acknowledges the legitimacy of these sessions. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Fine. I'll send a formal note tomorrow. With that, she stood, shoved the letter in a file, and collected her clipboard. Meeting adjourned, I guess, she muttered, striding out. Ms. Guerra gave me an apologetic smile. I'm sorry about all this. I hope things settle now. I thanked her, though I remained cautious. I left feeling guardedly optimistic. Perhaps Karen realized her stance was unsustainable. Maybe at last, Mikey could receive his therapy in peace. If only I'd known that Karen's obsession with enforcement wouldn't die so easily. True to her word, surprisingly, Karen emailed me a note the next day stating, Therapy sessions at 227 Maplewood. The Maplewood Hills HO acknowledges the medical nature of your child's sessions and shall not impose fines based on this activity. Thank you for cooperating with our request for information. Regards, Karen Wilcox, President. Though terse, it was a semblance of official closure. I printed a copy, hoping this would be the end of the matter. For the next couple of weeks, life seemed calmer. Daniel continued to arrive, Mikey made progress, and no letters appeared. Occasionally, I spotted Karen walking around, but she seemed less focused on our house. I dared to hope the conflict was resolved. Mikey's therapy advanced smoothly. Daniel introduced new exercises involving social stories, short narrations to help Mikey navigate daily interactions. I noticed Mikey echoing some phrases, trying to incorporate them spontaneously. He even managed to wave at a neighbor one afternoon, which was a milestone for him. It felt like we could finally enjoy Maplewood Hills for what it was meant to be, a safe, structured environment. Our front lawn looked neat, the trash bins complied with the designated hours, and we avoided any drama. I even considered joining the upcoming block party to meet more neighbors, perhaps forging friendships for Mikey's sake. But deep down, I remained on edge. Karen's abrupt shift in tone didn't feel natural. She was the type to double down or find new angles. As it happened, I was right to worry. Her next move was more drastic than I ever imagined. One sunny Thursday afternoon, Daniel arrived for the usual session. Mikey was in a good mood, excitedly repeating, "Daniel, come. Daniel, come." We settled around the dining table with colorful picture cards, and Daniel started a labeling activity. Mikey responded well, giggling whenever he got a picture right. Then, about 30 minutes in, Mikey began stimmying with a repetitive patting gesture on the table. Daniel guided him to channel that into a calmer movement, demonstrating how to tap gently rather than slam. The process was typical for an ABA session, repeated, methodical practice. Mikey sometimes vocalized unusual sounds or repeated phrases. Nothing loud enough to bother neighbors, but presumably visible through a window if someone was snooping outside. Midway through, I noticed movement on the sidewalk. Peering out, I recognized Karen's blonde hair near the corner. My stomach sank. She was holding her phone at an odd angle, possibly filming. I tried to ignore it, focusing on Mikey's progress. 15 minutes later, a jarring sound shattered the calm, sirens. Startled, Daniel paused. Mikey covered his ears, upset by the sudden noise. Through the window, I saw a police cruiser pulling to a stop in front of our house, lights flashing, but siren quieting as it parked. My heart lurched. Why were the police here? I opened the door, confusion twisting my features. 2 officers stepped out, scanning the scene. One approached. "Ma'am, we received a call about a potential disturbance or suspicious activity here." He seemed uncertain, glancing at the neat suburban setting. "Could we speak with you for a moment?" Over the officer's shoulder, I spotted Karen on the sidewalk, arms folded, expression triumphant. Blood roared in my ears. She had actually called the police on my child's therapy session. I forced a calm voice. "Officer, I'm not sure why you were called. We're in the middle of a licensed therapy session for my autistic son. There's no disturbance, no wrongdoing." He nodded, looking both perplexed and sympathetic. "We got a report of repetitive banging, possible, harmful scenario, and a private tutoring business that might be operating illegally. We had to check it out." Behind me, Daniel stepped to the doorway, wearing his name badge from Bright Path. "Officers, I'm a certified ABA therapist. Here's my ID and credentials. The child is receiving therapy for autism. There's absolutely nothing illegal or harmful going on." The second officer peered inside, saw Mikey rocking gently on the couch, hugging a stuffed dinosaur. "Everything looks fine," he said quietly. "We just need to confirm you're authorized, which you obviously are." The first officer exhaled. "Ma'am, sorry to bother you. We do have to respond whenever someone claims a potential threat to a child. This call, though, appears to be unfounded." Karen approached, raising her voice. "Officers, I saw unusual repetitive behavior, and it seemed suspicious. I was concerned about the child's welfare. And this is an unlicensed activity in my neighborhood." One officer frowned at her. "Are you a caretaker, ma'am? A relative? If not, you might not have full context. From what we see, this is a valid therapy session. The child's not in any danger." Karen's face reddened, but she kept pushing. "I'm the HOA president. This is a private residential area, and they have these sessions multiple times a week without official clearance. You have to investigate thoroughly." The second officer raised a hand. "We've seen the therapist's credentials. If you have questions about local business ordinances, that's a civil matter. We respond to emergencies and potential crimes. There's no sign of either." Karen looked as though she'd been slapped. The police were not on her side, and all of this was happening in front of a few onlooking neighbors. Well, she sputtered, I just wanted to protect the neighborhood. If the child is truly having therapy, I had no idea. I couldn't contain my anger any longer. Yes, you did, I snapped. We provided proof to the HOA weeks ago. You had no right to call the police. She glared at me, then turned to the officers. Is there anything else you need, officers? She demanded, trying to sound authoritative. They exchanged glances. The first officer shrugged. No, we're satisfied this is a legitimate therapy session. Sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am, he said to me, tipping his cap. You two have a good day. With that, the cruiser drove off, leaving me trembling with rage. Karen pivoted on her heel, heading down the sidewalk with a huff. Several neighbors who had emerged to watch whispered to each other. I saw pity and shock in their faces. Daniel gently touched my shoulder. Let's go back inside. Mikey is probably upset. We found Mikey curled up in his favorite corner, hands over his ears, quietly repeating, "Siren too loud, siren too loud." My heart broke. I knelt beside him, offering calm reassurance. Meanwhile, a wave of determination swept over me. Karen had escalated to calling the police for a therapy session. If she wouldn't back off, I would make sure she faced consequences for her actions. The police call changed everything. Word spread quickly among neighbors that Karen had dialed 911 over an autism therapy session. Some were outraged, seeing it as a gross overreaction. Others, who barely knew us, became curious about the details. I received messages of support from a few households. One neighbor, Ms. Dorsey, approached me while I walked Mikey to the park. I heard what happened, she said softly. I'm so sorry you're dealing with that. Karen's gone too far this time. Another neighbor, Mr. Ramirez, wrote me a note saying his nephew is also on the spectrum, and if I needed help or a witness, he'd be there. It comforted me to realize we weren't alone. Maplewood Hills might have a controlling HOA president, but it also had kind residents who recognized injustice. Daniel filed a brief incident report with his agency, summarizing how the therapy session was interrupted by the police. They, in turn, reached out to me. Their in-house counsel stated that we could take legal action for harassment if this continued. They also recommended writing to the HOA board to demand a formal statement admonishing Karen for the false report. I followed that advice. I penned a strongly worded letter to the entire board. Subject: Harassment and False Police Report. Dear Maplewood Hills Board, I'm writing to notify you that Ms. Karen Wilcox, the HOA president, called the police on my child's medically recognized ABA therapy session. The responding officers confirmed no wrongdoing and left promptly. This was a baseless escalation of a matter already deemed legitimate by the board. I request immediate board action to address this harassment, as it has caused emotional distress to my child and disrupted critical therapy. If further incidents occur, I will explore legal remedies. Respectfully, Lisa, last name. I also copied Ms. Guerra and Mr. Tate specifically. Within 48 hours, Ms. Guerra replied, calling the incident unfortunate and promising the board would discuss it at an emergency meeting. She apologized personally for the stress. Mr. Tate emailed, "This is unacceptable. We'll handle it. Hang in there." Meanwhile, I tried to keep Mikey's routine stable. He was rattled by the siren, but Daniel used social stories to help him process the event. Sometimes loud cars come, but we're safe, was the simplified narrative. However, each day I braced myself for more of Karen's antics. Karen's 911 stunt unleashed a wave of negative opinion against her. The Maplewood Hills online forum lit up with threads discussing how the HOA president had overstepped, targeted a special needs child, and wasted police resources. Some posts were furious, demanding that Karen apologize publicly or even step down. One parent wrote, "If she can do this to a therapy session, what's next? A child's tutor? A caretaker for an elderly resident?" Another resident asked if the HOA fees were being misused to fund Karen's personal vendettas. The general consensus was that she'd gone too far. Karen tried to do damage control. She posted a statement claiming she acted out of genuine concern, because she didn't understand the nature of the repeated, intense activities. She insisted she merely wanted professional verification that the child was safe. But after the board had already verified that it was legitimate therapy, few believed her excuse. People in the neighborhood began avoiding Karen in public. Some who once tolerated her controlling ways realized that if they didn't push back, anyone could be singled out next. A small group started circulating a petition calling for her removal as HOA president. They argued that she had abused her authority and jeopardized the community's reputation. I didn't initiate the petition. Neighbors did that of their own accord, but I couldn't deny feeling relieved that others saw the injustice. Meanwhile, I pressed forward with the official board complaint, wanting a clear condemnation of Karen's behavior in the meeting minutes. A week after the police incident, the board convened an emergency session. It took place at 6 p.m. in the same community center room. Karen was present, but looked distinctly uneasy. The row of chairs was nearly full. Evidently, many residents wanted to see how the board would handle this fiasco. Ms. Guerra opened the session, explaining they were there to address serious concerns regarding a recent police call initiated by the HOA president. Mr. Tate nodded, then invited me to speak. I explained, calmly but firmly, what happened, the therapy session, Karen's knowledge of it, her decision to call the police under false pretenses, and the emotional toll on my child. When I finished, Ms. Guerra addressed Karen directly. Karen, is it true you called the police after the board had already accepted Ms. last name S therapy documentation? Karen, looking defensive, insisted she only had partial information. I worried about the child's well-being. I saw repetitive motions that seemed extreme, and I feared possible abuse or meltdown. This was about the child's safety, not any vendetta. Angry murmurs rippled through the audience. One father stood, saying, "That's nonsense. We all know you had the official letters. This was harassment, plain and simple." Karen bristled. "Excuse me, but I have the right, indeed the duty, to protect this community from potential harm. If I see suspicious activity, I will call the authorities." She shot me a withering look. Mr. Tate cleared his throat. "Karen, the board previously acknowledged these therapy sessions as legitimate. You circumvented that consensus by making a unilateral decision to call 911. That's a serious step, implying immediate danger, which clearly wasn't the case." Karen tried to interrupt, but Ms. Guerra continued, "We've received numerous complaints from residents. Many feel you overstepped your authority and put the community in a bad light. The local police consider it a waste of resources. We need to discuss disciplinary action or possible removal from your position." Gasps sounded from a few corners. Karen's jaw tightened. "You can't remove me without a formal recall process. I was elected by the membership," she hissed. Ms. Guerra nodded. "We know. That's why we'll follow the bylaws. But your conduct stands in violation of our code of ethics. We can vote tonight to suspend your duties pending a recall election if we deem it necessary." A wave of tension filled the room. Karen's eyes flashed with anger, but she seemed cornered. The board members exchanged glances, then Mr. Tate said, "Let's put it to a vote." They voted one by one. Ms. Guerra, yes. Mr. Tate, yes. The treasurer, yes. The other member, yes. Karen was the only dissenting vote. She was effectively suspended pending a broader membership recall. Shouts of relief and approval echoed. Karen sat stiffly stunned. She tried to protest, but Ms. Guerra calmly ended the discussion, stating they would schedule a community-wide recall meeting within 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the board would investigate further whether Karen violated any local laws or guidelines beyond the bylaws themselves. I felt a surge of vindication but also pity for Karen. She stared at the table, refusing to look at anyone, as neighbors whispered angrily about her. This was the turning point. Karen had finally lost her iron grip on Maplewood Hills. In the days following Karen's suspension, the atmosphere in Maplewood Hills shifted. Some residents celebrated openly, posting messages in the forum about how they felt liberated from constant nitpicking. Others worried that Karen would not go down without a fight. For me, it was a welcome respite. No new letters appeared on my door. Daniel continued therapy sessions free from interruptions. Mikey seemed calmer. The only lingering effect was that he asked about the loud car police siren occasionally, but Daniel's social stories helped him cope. One afternoon, Ms. Dorsey from down the street knocked on my door with a casserole, saying it was a small token of solidarity. I nearly cried at the kindness. She said, "Don't worry, the recall is basically guaranteed. I've been here 15 years, and we've never seen the board turn on a president like this before." I thanked her, feeling an odd mixture of relief and apprehension. Karen's house was only 3 blocks away. I didn't see her out patrolling with her clipboard anymore. But I did glimpse her at times through her window, pacing on the phone. Rumor had it she was contacting lawyers or maybe rallying the few loyal neighbors left. No matter. My focus was on Mikey's well-being. He was the reason I'd fought so hard. Karen's personal vendetta had nearly overshadowed our crucial therapy routine, but we prevailed. Now, only the recall election stood between us and a final resolution. 2 weeks later, the special recall meeting took place on a Saturday morning at the community center. Every homeowner was invited to vote on whether Karen should be permanently removed as HOA president. Ballots were distributed upon proof of residency. Karen showed up, flanked by a few supporters, wearing a severe expression. Her typical confident posture was replaced with tension. A sea of residents formed a line, waiting to cast votes at tables manned by volunteer tellers. I spotted neighbors from all walks of life, retirees, families with young kids, middle-aged couples. Many recognized me from the therapy fiasco. A few patted my shoulder or whispered encouragement. As I cast my ballot yes to remove Karen, I felt a rush of hope. The process took an hour as hundreds of ballots were collected. By 11 a.m., Ms. Guerra stepped forward to announce the results. Karen stood in the back, arms folded. Silence gripped the room as Ms. Guerra read from a sheet. The final tally is 312 in favor of removal, 57 opposed. The motion to recall Ms. Karen Wilcox as HOA president passes by a significant margin. Effective immediately, Ms. Wilcox is relieved of all HOA leadership duties. A special election will be held next month to select a new president. Meanwhile, Vice President Tate will act as interim. Relieved applause filled the center. Some even cheered. Karen's face turned crimson. She spun around and stormed out, ignoring the calls of "Karen, wait," from her few supporters. I felt a weight lift from my chest. The era of HOA Karen was officially over. Though the recall sealed Karen's fate as HOA president, there remained the question of her misuse of 911. The local police force had quietly expressed frustration over the frivolous call. They had the option to file a formal complaint or impose a fine. Additionally, the new interim board considered taking internal measures for the stress and potential liability she caused the association. A week after the recall, an official letter from Maplewood Hills arrived in my mailbox. It wasn't from Karen, obviously, but from the board. Dear Ms. Last name. We apologize for the distress caused by the former HOA president's actions. Please be advised that the HOA has formally censured Ms. Wilcox. She faces financial penalties to reimburse legal fees and any fines resulting from the baseless 911 call. She is also barred from holding any board position in the future. We appreciate your patience and cooperation throughout this ordeal and wish you and your son all the best. Sincerely, the Maplewood Hills HOA Board. Reading it felt like closure. Karen was penalized financially, barred from leadership, and left to face the embarrassment of having tried to sabotage essential therapy for a special needs child. The local authorities also sent her a warning letter about future false calls. Some neighbors gleefully reported that Karen's house had a "for sale" sign up within a month. Others said she might stay, but would never again hold an ounce of HOA power. Either way, her reign of petty tyranny was done. With Karen gone from the HOA's helm, Maplewood Hills felt like a different place. The atmosphere lightened, less fear of random fines or humiliating confrontations. The new board, led by interim President Tate, held a listening session where residents could voice concerns. They pledged more transparency and fewer arbitrary citations. For us, the biggest change was simply peace. Mikey continued his sessions with Daniel, unperturbed by any further interruptions. Each time I saw that little boy focusing intently on a puzzle or successfully asking for help in clear words, my heart soared. We'd come to Maplewood Hills for stability and safety, and at last we had it. One sunny afternoon, a group of neighbors organized a small support circle for families dealing with special needs. They invited me to share about autism, therapy techniques, and how to foster an inclusive environment. The warmth and curiosity from the community gave me hope that, beyond the drama of Karen, Maplewood Hills could be a place of real compassion. Daniel occasionally joked, "I guess I have the Karen-free guarantee now?" I laughed in relief. The memory of that day the police showed up was still raw, but overshadowed by the knowledge that justice had been served. I sometimes wondered how Karen felt, sitting in her house, stripped of her presidency, forced to face the scorn of neighbors who once tolerated or feared her. Yet I tried not to dwell on it. My energy was better spent cherishing Mikey's improvements. Months passed, and with them, Mikey's growth soared. He began making short but heartfelt sentences like, "Mommy, I feel happy," or "Daniel, play puzzle with me." His meltdown frequency dropped, and he even ventured to the community park's small playground on occasion. I guided him gently through the slides, proud of each brave step. During those calmer times, I would reflect on how close we came to losing that sense of security. If Karen's harassment had continued unabated, if the board had sided with her, if the police had misread the situation, we could have been forced to move again, uprooting Mikey's entire progress. But we stood our ground, supported by ethical board members, concerned neighbors, and the unwavering legality of medically recognized services. The memory of Karen's punishment reminded me that, in the end, communities can stand up against bullies in power. The HOAs around the country might have many Karens, but Maplewood Hills proved that, even in a heavily regulated neighborhood, reason and empathy could prevail. All it took was courage from those who refused to let injustice slide. I closed my eyes, listening to Mikey hum a sweet, repetitive tune in the next room. Through the window, the bright sunshine revealed a street where people no longer flinched at the mention of the HOA. Where an autism therapist's car, parked in the driveway, raised no suspicions, only acceptance. And in the quiet corners of the suburban dream, I found exactly what I had longed for, a safe, nurturing environment for my son.